Paramania Radio. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Paramania, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
You are listening to Paramania Radio.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you happen to be in the world. Welcome to Paramania Radio, and you're listening to Leo Bonomo on the Paramania show. I've got a wonderful guest this evening, or this morning, wherever you happen to be. She's from Denmark. She's an outstanding medium herself. And she's here to talk about some of her life and some of the things that have happened and experienced. It may be a surprise to many that whilst we talk about British mediums and psychics in the States and in very small places of the world, the Nordic countries have largely been ignored. And there's tremendous work that's being done there. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Marion Damper-Jeans. And hi, Marion, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm
Nice
very well, thank you. It's wonderful to speak to you. Yes, it's we were having a chat, weren't we, when we were setting up the interview and talking about some of the wonderful work that's been done. Give us a little background on yourself and when you came to England, etc.
Right, as you all know, I was born in Denmark, but I'm also half Norwegian. My mother and my brother is from Norway, and I'm from Denmark together with my father. So I was actually within a spiritual family because my father went to what we call the halls and places for spiritualism in Denmark in 1930s. And my mother was a wonderful independent voice medium. She had it in the light in Norway. And she's from right the way up the North Norway, so she has a Sami connection, which is our nature people we have got in North Norway. And as I grew up, I just had spirit around me. It was nothing. You just talk to them. One of my playfield, as I called it, was a local graveyard. And I just used to go there and talk to those the vicar sort of buried the day before. So we had great conversation, him and I think because at having a conversation, I got very close to him as a priest, and he always had a little eye on me. But I did actually come to England. I was brought into England, I better say, back in 1969. Where I started what we call spiritualism, really. I came into, didn't know anything about the churches, didn't know that we had this in Great Britain, has in fact never heard about we had spiritualist churches. But one day, and it's a very nice little story, I was going to look for a flat. And I was at Victoria Station because this flat was in something in South London called West Norwood. And and as I got off the train, a wind blew up and a piece of paper just landed on my chest. I couldn't really read it very well, so I just put it in the pocket. Went down to have a look at the flat, and I got the people who lived in the flat met me. There was a mother and daughter, asked me in for a cup of tea, and I just took this piece of paper out and says, "Does anybody know what it says?" And the mother Barbara looked at it and went, "Oh God." "Oh my God," she went. I said, "Oh my God," she went. I said, "What's wrong with you?" And she said, "Apparently you have been invited to go and see something about a medium in a spiritualist church in West Norwood at 7:00 tonight." And I said, I said, what's a medium then? She said, I think they talk to the dead. And I went, do they? And I sort of ended up going to the church together with a daughter. Her name was Jill. And it took us about 5 minutes before we even dare walk into the church in West Norwood, but got there. And of course, sat in the first row. But it was interesting because at the medium, a very elderly lady came and sat in her chair. And within sort of 10 minutes, she was in deep trance, stood up, pointed a finger at me and spoke Norwegian. And I just sat there, yeah. So I was just told, welcome to Great Britain. You're here. We have been waiting for you. And it was my Norwegian grandmother.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
So that was my first sort of step into a spiritualist church. I have to say, after I had the message, I ran very quickly back out of the church again. It was a sort of a bit of a shock.
I can imagine. And it's wonderful because, in this, I hate to refer to it as a trade, but it is. But, we talk about coincidences and you, like myself, we don't believe in coincidences. It all happens. But people talk about this stuff, don't they? I'm walking along the street and, a leaflet was blown and there's an invite. And it's just wonderful to have sort of that experience directly related.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting thing because when you don't understand anything about spiritualism, though I was brought up in it, we didn't sort of really talk about it, but I was just allowed to be myself. Then coming into Great Britain where you had something like 1,000 spiritualist churches, I mean, that was a heck of a lot of churches and still not understanding. So, and it was also in a time, you've got to remember, it was in the 1969s, the Beatles, the Who, the Rolling Stones, King's Road, all that kind of thing. Yeah. So I was very busy and very occupied, with that form. And if you can imagine, I mean, you have seen me, long, tall, blonde hair. At the time, I had miniskirts on and long, eyelashes and things like that. So can you then imagine when they allowed me to go on the platform 6 months later, stood there with a miniskirt? I mean, it caused the uproar.
I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we talk about the SNU sometimes on this program, and you hear some. I think they're terrible stories actually, where mediums are going to be qualified, so they're doing a demonstration to qualify, and they're not wearing a tie or the skirt doesn't look right, not necessarily miniskirt, and they fail them for that.
I know.
It's a terrible thing because it's presentation's something, but surely if you're being tested like that, it's the mediumship itself. So
yeah, it is. But I just think that when I first got here, we didn't really know about young mediums. I mean, the mediums within Great Britain was all in sort of the 60s, 70s and onwards with, the women had long skirts on and things like that. And I just got pushed into this market as a hippie, if you like, this kind of thing. And I actually have to say that I didn't have a good welcome in any of the churches. They were all moaning and groaning. For the first, I was Danish. For the first, I had an accent. And for the, I was a very lively young medium on the platform. And some of the words, of course, that came out, there was a bit sort of twinkle up. And it made people laugh, but the churches didn't like it. So I had a very hard time. But I have to say something. Thank you for the hard time that your British people gave me when I first came to England. I actually stood back and I said, you will not laugh at me in the future because I'm really going to work on this one. And I have. So,
it's fantastic, isn't it? And I think it's a wonderful example there of what appears to be a negative situation.
Absolutely.
Which turns into a very positive, and that's something else that I talk about quite a lot because I don't believe there are really negative situations in life. It's negative when you're sitting there, in the middle of it, but it does produce such wonderful positive results.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, but I do know, and you've got to understand that being a young person coming in to work in Great Britain and being part of this establishment, as I call it, I have really had to prove myself. And I think that one of the times, well, 2 times I can think of, but one of the times, because of my work, is not just mental, but it's also physical mediumship. And I had a telephone call from another medium who's now passed over, called Florrie Roberts, and she phoned me up with a very bad cold and asked me if I could step in her footstep. And I turned around and I said, yeah, all right, where are you? She said, in Barnes Spiritualist Church. And I said, yeah, get the person to phone me up and I will come down. And so I did, and I was invited. It was raining, and as I got out of the car, I just got drenched, got into the Spiritualist Church, and I think his name was Mr. Wallace or Williams or something like that. Anyhow, got in there. He took one look at me and he went, "Oh my God, you're young." And I looked at him and said, "What?" And when I actually got to the church, I was just so negatively greeted. And when I got on the platform, there must have been about 25 people in the church at the time. And the people, you could hear the people saying, "Oh, it's not Florrie Roberts, it's a young person with a funny accent." And I thought, how dare you? They all know I can hear it. But what actually happened that evening set everything spinning. Because when I got on the platform, the people were sitting there and they were half asleep. And I just stood up, and even my chairperson was asleep. I just stood up and said, "Don't listen to me, then listen to Spirit themselves." And what he had was a piano in that room. And on the piano, there was a big plant. It was like a palm plant. And I just turned around and said, "Watch this." And the actually plant took off in midair and spun around and went back onto the piano again with a big boom. And my chairperson woke up and he went, "Anything happened? What was that?" And I just looked at him, and half of the congregation ran through the back door quick out of the church.
That's the way to make an entrance.
Yeah, and I just turned around and I says, "Well, there you go." And after that, I have to say that I kept on being asked back to the churches. So I do actually, and have had many occasion, physical phenomena, both in the light, also given to the people, so many people have seen it. So I think that when that started, I began really to have credibility for the work in which I was doing.
Yes. And I think it's wonderful that spirit chip in like that. We've also talked before about physical mediumship, because you were telling me about in the Nordic countries, there's wonderful work being done, scientifically tested, and most of the rest of the world doesn't know anything about it. So tell some of the listeners some of your experiences there.
Yeah. Well, in the past, we have always had physical mediums in Denmark that were tested. Our last physical medium who passed over was a gentleman called Ejner Nielsen, and he passed over in 1965. And he was a tremendous physical medium who got tested at Rhein when it was in Switzerland, Rhein Studio, when it was in Switzerland. He got tested by various different scientists both in Norway and in Iceland and in Copenhagen and everywhere like this. Ejner was just an ordinary man, but what he had was a tremendous power in the physical mediumship. And he started when he was 17, his work. One of the things that he was extremely good at was materializing a spirit, but in shallow light. And he always stood with some of the materialization in as the room itself. So he actually left the cabinet, stood out, and had two of the physical phenomena, as the spirits standing right next to him, and he was all having a conversation with each other. There was one little story I still keep on smiling at, and that was that he lived on the first floor in Copenhagen. We call it the workman's sort of quarters. Oh, yeah, and every Monday when he had his circle, you would hear them laughing and going upstairs. Well, there was one Monday, the guy downstairs stopped the leader of the circle and saying, "Right, this is it," he said. "I want to know what kind of Christian things are you doing up there? I can hear you singing." And she stood there and she said, she went like this. Anyhow, it ended up with that he wanted to come up and see what was happening. So, she had to let him in, and she told Einar this, so he was allowed to sit.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the circle, suddenly, no more than about 20 minutes into the circle, you heard the biggest bang, crash, loud wallop, and something fell in the middle of the circle, and he couldn't even move their feet. And she turned around and she literally said her name was Rimor Leppe. She turned around and she said, I think we will have to call Einar back because there's something in the circle. We don't know what it is. So what happened then was Einar then woke up, the light got on, and they all looked in the middle of the floor. They counted 17 oil paintings with frames lying on top of each other.
Wow.
So he took the first sort of, painting off, and he said, I wonder where this one come from. And the man downstairs said, well, that looks familiar. I have got one of those. And he just kept on showing all these paintings. And he said, that's strange. I've got one of those too. So the whole circle went downstairs to the flat, went in, and all his painting had disappeared. he was lying upstairs as a port, all 17 of them. And this guy stood there. Isn't it brilliant? So he became another member of the circle. These are the things that our physical mediums did in Denmark. We also had a fantastic photographer. His name is Sven Turk, and you will see many of his levitation photographs all over the world. People just use them. Don't know anything about him. They just use it. But he had a laboratorium in Copenhagen where there was a medium called Anne Melone Rasmussen who sat there. She was a telekinesis medium. And every time she came in there, the tables couldn't stand still. All the crockery flew out of the cabinets. It was going around to the tact of the music. The people sitting on the chair was levitating into the room. And it just went on and on and on. She was a fantastic medium, but he photographed it all. He had 4 cameras and took pictures. I think he took something in the region of about maybe 25,000 pictures. Over a period of about 5 years. And what then happened there were that, there was people who didn't believe in it. They burned some of it and things like this. Again, I'm sitting on many of his pictures and also his stories about who he was. So we had him. And then we had Anne Melone Rasmussen. They had an incredible telekinesis power. She could do all sorts of things. Every time she went for a piano, it started to play. And one time she had the window guy in to polish her window. And she sort of asked him, "Oh, Ole, do you want a cup of coffee?" And Ole sort of shouted, "Yes, thank you." And then within 5 minutes, she heard crash, bang, and Ole screaming in the living room. When she went back into the living room, there was her coffee table lifted in the air, the settee, Ole was shut into the settee and just was laid down, and the armchairs was all started to move around. So where he sat, he was now over in the other side of the room, and Ole just stood up and he just said, "No, thank you to coffee. I'm leaving." And I don't know if she ever got her windows polished again. So that's just some of it. But we also, of course, have, mediums that has been up in Greenland, and people never talk about Greenland. The Inuit people up there, they have their own sort of mediums that has a different belief, but they still have ghost, as he calls them, or spirit and communication. And I have worked there, and it is a very interesting, very spiritual place. Very laid back people, but has a tremendous power. Again, as I say, and you have then got up in North Norway, North Sweden, North Finland, into Russia. You have got something called the Sami people, which are very close actually to the American Red Indian, because that they have also got their drums in which they play, and they have got something called labo, which is the same sort of teepee tent as what the Red Indian have, and they will also dance around the fire. and they have full spirit communication. And there was many things that happened up there in which I have been and taken part in myself, because speaking the languages, of course. And the same in Iceland. They have had a lot of research centers, and apparently they had research centers in Iceland since 1888. What they have actually gone into research a lot of both physical mediums and mental mediums around the Nordic countries, where our mediums from Scandinavia, of course, have been up to. So we have incredible, history.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fantastic to me that the rest of the world has kind of either drawn away or not explored. I know that we have some wonderful mediums in England and the States, but it sounds like there's a real conglomeration of mediums, very strong mediums. Do you feel that there's anything about either the Nordic way of life or anything that produces such wonderful mediums?
Yeah, I think that you have always lived with nature, the whole of the Nordic countries. We have always had this outdoors attitude. To live a lot by nature itself, by listening to the nature, just like the Red Indian have done. I mean, telling you a little story from Greenland, which was quite interesting, because that when I was out working there, people knew me because that I have to say my books in the Nordic countries have sold over 400,000, books and this kind of thing, which is the biggest selling point in the Nordic countries of any spiritual book ever printed. And what was really interesting were that I was invited for a Greenlandic dinner, which means raw fish, or should we just say sushi, which is very interesting. And this little old lady was sitting in the corner looking at me. And she said to me, "I want to tell you a story, Marion, and I know that you will understand it." And I looked at her and she said, "Let me tell you the story." And this is what she told me. And everybody, her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, was also listening to her. And she told me that her father had what is called a kayak. And the kayak itself was what we call a family kayak, which means that you can have 4 or 5 people or 6 people sitting in it. And in a certain time of the year in Greenland, they could go in to this kayak because the water hasn't frozen over by this point. And if he was going into the fjords, there was places where they actually had small berries, and these berries that was growing, they could go and pick. So in came the brother and this young girl, mom and dad, grandmother and grandfather, all hopped in, and then they went out in the kayak. And it was like around the big iceberg and things like that. And they got there, they pulled up the kayak up to the land, and then they went up this little hill with the buckets, tried to sort of get all the berries. So they got the berries, came back down again, hopped into the kayak, and then they all, just sailed off again. And suddenly Granddad was sitting there going, "Hello, are we not missing one?" So he was counting them, and said, "Oh my God, we're missing one." And they all sort of looked back in again, and you could see that little dot, if you like, there.
Yes.
They have forgotten this very young girl at the age of 6. So they were sort of trying to shout to her, "Please don't stay where you are, we'll come in." She didn't hear anything. So she took a bucket and then she ran. And this young girl ran on the water right away out to the kayak, put her bucket down, went into the kayak. Mother looked, took the bucket in. They all sat looking at her. Mother took her shoes or her magazine, turned her upside down, and so only 2 stripes of water on her shoes.
Wow.
And there was no way that there was any ice on that water or anything. This little girl actually ran on the water.
That's fantastic. Sorry, go on.
These are just part of the phenomena in which I have been involved in, have seen, has been part of, which really amused me. There's no other person interested in these things, which is...
It's nice to have the actual, although she's grown up, of course, the little girl there, and also some of the witnesses that saw that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because physical mediumship started in the light, and
Mhm.
we've got into this phase, well, certainly in this country anyway, and I think in Australia, I think New Zealand as well, and various other places, of the seances in the dark.
Mhm.
And we do get mediums, don't we, that say, well, our spirit guides say that we can't do this and we can't do that. I do find that hard to believe because it started in the dark, didn't it?
Well, hang
In
on a
the light,
minute.
sorry.
Yeah, but
Mm,
hang on a minute. My mother has independent voice
mm,
in the light, in the daytime.
yeah,
And Ejner Nielsen walked out of the cabinet in Denmark with two full formed physical spirit, also
yeah,
in shallow light. And also, I have another circle in Denmark in which I work with and go and sit with and so forth. There's a medium there called Jakob, a fantastic young man. Didn't know that
mm,
he had all this in him, but he levitates out of the cabinet. He actually floats out of the cabinet. We have
right,
a light done. We have two films. So we actually are filming it in infrared light at the same time. And we
yeah,
also have it on recording. And he just levitates out, turns around, and comes back in again. And there was one time in the light, and this is where I'm sitting completely baffled that people don't want to listen to this. He comes out and he says, "Oh, ectoplasm has been formed." Now, he's not even asleep, he's awake. So
yeah,
he walked out of the cabinet just like what Ejner Nielsen did, and he stood with his arms stretched out to each side, and you could actually see ectoplasm starting to form. It
yeah,
looked like gooey things. It was seafood, and it was just hanging there, and it was just boinking up and down. But you could also see it was falling onto the ground, and you could hear drip, drip, drip. So the leader of the circle and I went up and asked, could we touch it?
yeah,
And the answer back were, of course you can. So we went up to touch it, and you could feel the stickiness of the
yeah,
ectoplasm. But as soon as we took the hands away from it, we were dry. There was not anything in our hands,
wow,
and there was nothing on the floor. So that wasn't in the dark. That was in the light where you actually saw ectoplasm forming. And we never talked about that. I have never heard one medium in Great Britain or anywhere else that actually talk about how does ectoplasm form or even start. And here
yeah,
we see it in Denmark, in a small circle in Denmark. We actually see ectoplasm forming and
yeah.
actually touches it.
That's fantastic because another thing that the physical mediums say is that you're not allowed to touch it. It can cause burns, and we know sometimes there are,
Oh, it
or there
does.
have been
Yes.
accidents. Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it seems that what I've questioned a lot
Mm-hmm.
is that you can have these experiences and you can have them in the light, and there is this myth that seems to have grown up about it can only be done in the dark and this can't happen and that can't happen. But if the spirit teams are working in Denmark and other Nordic countries in that way, surely the spirit teams with other physical mediums in other parts of the world, because they will talk to each other, of course, there are
Yeah.
bands of scientists, and they say, well, look, we're actually doing this, and this is how to do it, and produce that effect in other physical seances. That
Yeah.
doesn't seem to go on.
No, I don't understand it. As I said, my mother was an independent voice medium. She just had it
Mm,
outside. But, my aunt, my mother's sister, she was at a graveyard in the middle of nowhere trying to plant some flower as a pot of plant that she's just bought for her father. We're talking about 10, 15 years ago. And she
mm,
was there. Now, being in North Norway, where I'm talking about now, you can't really dig anything in the ground because it's solid rock and things like that. And she
yeah,
just stood there with her hands in there in the middle of nowhere in this graveyard. She just said, "Oh, well, sorry, Dad, can't plant, you bloody plant." And the
mm,
next thing she knew, a spoon flew through the air and landed right in front of her. And there was no houses on either side. That's in
yeah,
the middle of the day. And this
yeah.
silver spoon was like a soup spoon. And she had that one for many years until one day it disappeared again, from her house.
Yeah, because they can take them back when
Oh,
they're
they
either
do.
of no use or served a
Yeah.
purpose. Yeah,
But I think actually you take it back to give it to somebody else. I
yeah.
think that you actually materialize it somewhere else. I mean, I have had, bottles of whiskies disappearing on me and things like that,
Mm.
and all sort of things. Never got it back, but it still disappeared. There's lots of stories like that. But, talking about now the Sami people and the history of them is absolutely extraordinary. But also what we call the healing power, because we mustn't forget that within both mental mediumship and physical mediumship, we have also got healing. And they are very rare people. I know that this phenomenon does happen in other parts of the world because it happened, or I was told about this in Cornwall back in 1970s from a man called Bob Greenaway. But I also know that in Norway, I had to look at this firsthand. There's something called blood stemming, which means people who can stop the blood.
Yeah.
And these people is around very often in nature and with nature people. If you can imagine these Sami people living, either you have Sami people living at the sea, you have Sami people living on the land, and you've got Sami people in the mountain.
Yeah.
And they are hunting the reindeer in the cold and whatever. In those days, there was no way a helicopter is going to land if you had an accident with one of the reindeers, Rudolph. I mean, honestly, they have got so sharp horns and things like that. But what they always had with them was one of these people known as a blood stopper. And if they had or was an accident, for instance, where they have a deep cut anywhere in the body, they would call this Sami person, the blood stopper, to that person, and he will say some words, and suddenly the blood will completely stop, and even the cut will start to heal itself. So in a part of North Norway, in one of the biggest teaching hospitals, should be remained quiet because they don't like talking about it. They have got 2 blood stoppers in there in case that somebody has internal bleeding under the operation. And if the doctors can't stop it, they will call one of those 2 blood stoppers in to stop it. That's fantastic.
It is. I mean, that is something that I know we discussed this pre-interview, but that is something that I'd never heard of before. And it just makes you wonder of the wonderful gifts if the human race generally had different attitudes and more accepting what we could achieve.
Absolutely. But what is also very interesting is that when you start following that path in which I have, and if you start looking at the things and go into research as I do, and I will follow them, and I've been invited in to see or sit in the lab or doing something called yoiki, which is a certain kind of rolling of the throat, and you can do, and you start watching it. And there was one day, I was out with the reindeers. I was up in North Norway, and I twisted my foot very badly, and I had to hop back again, back into somebody's house they lived in. And the woman there, she was also a blood stopper, and in the same time, she was also a healer. So she managed to get my shoe off, put my foot on the table, and then she went over to a big drawer. And I went, what's she doing? And she opened the drawer up, and you could hear her sort of rattling the knife and forks. And she just sort of went, oh, there you are. And she took up this knife, a very long knife, but the end of it was like horns from the reindeer. And you could see symbols around it. But you knew that what she had in her hand was proper iron because it was started to rust. And she just went over to me, got my socks and shoes off, put my foot on the table, and in my mind, I just said to myself, goodbye, foot. I thought she was going to cut the bugger off. But what she actually did, she took this big knife and she started to say words, and she just went over. She didn't touch my foot. She just went over my foot and said word and started to yoiki like this. And you actually saw the swelling of my foot go straight in. And my foot was normal again within 2 minutes. She looked at me and she just said, Marion, when you go back to England where you live, go and see your doctor. And that was it. And I was fine the rest of the time. Also, when I came back to London, I was just bruised and everything was fine. So we had those kind of things.
I'm a firm believer that because certainly during the Industrial Revolution, I think that in itself had quite a damaging, a limiting effect on our vibration, and it's had a lasting impact. Although I think with 2012, things have certainly shifted and they're happening. But I know that these things are inherent in us, and they were, thousands of years ago. It's an ability that's been lost, unfortunately.
Yeah, but Leo, it's still working today. We still have got these nature people. This was only about 5 years ago, darling, when I had this done to me. So they are still very much in full operation. The thing is about many of the nature people, including the Sami people, the Ignu people in Greenland, they don't talk about it because they don't want to be laughed at. So it is a little sacred or secret sort of sect, if you like, running around. But because they know who I am, because of my books and my television and all sort of things, they welcome me in because of my smile, and I can talk to them. And they realize I'm not going to laugh at them because I understand what is happening. And I think because of that, I don't know if you can imagine. I mean, I'm standing here and I'm just saying to people, I went up to a place it's called Tromsø or Tromsø in Norway, and I wanted to see the Northern Light. But unfortunately, what happened up there was no Northern Light because it was raining. And I went, oh my God, all I came up to see was the Northern Light. I was actually doing something with the Sami people on the radio. We was talking on the radio and so forth. And this old man was sitting and looking at me and saying, would you like to see the Northern Light, Marion? I said, yeah, I'm up here. So I thought it would be very nice. I mean, but now it's raining, and we looked at the weather in England and it was raining. He said, I will see what we can do for you. And I went, what do you mean you will see what you can do for me? And believe me if I tell you, at 5 o'clock it was very dark, because it always is dark. We have got 24 hours darkness in the north of Norway and the opposite in the summertime. Suddenly I could hear them shouting, where's Marion? Where's Marion? And I stood up and said, I'm here. She said, well, come on out and see the Northern Light. And he had, I think it was 5 Sami drummers doing yoiki on small mounts around the campfire. And they was all standing there. Suddenly, I'm telling you, the rain stopped. And suddenly I was going in the air just to see my breath. It was going colder. And within 10 minutes, you saw the Northern Light dancing in the sky, in the corner of the sky, starting very slowly to come across. And he still stood there, yoiki. I phoned my husband in England and saying, do you know I'm seeing the Northern Light? And he said, never, because it says it's raining. I said, I know, but these kind of people you could hear in the background have just stopped the rain. And it lasted for about no more than about 3 and 4 minutes. And the whole drumming stopped, everything stopped. And these people who stood there in a Sami dress, they were sweating. And they came back in again, and I saw this, the Northern Light. These are the miracle, whatever you want to call them, that this world doesn't know about. And I'm going, it's crazy. We know about the North American and Great Indian because we punk down with it all the time from the States.
Absolutely. I mean, they have a rain dance, don't they? That they do, the North American Red Indian. I was talking to a Peruvian shaman a week or so ago, and she was talking about in an acre of land here, you may get 1,200 different plants. In an acre in the rainforest, you may have there's around 25,000 plants. And because they talk to spirit helped them. So they would say, well, you need a piece of this plant and a piece of that plant to produce a certain effect. And this is the kind of instinct that we used to have years ago, because if you think you've got 25,000 plants, they're not all edible for us. The chances of picking one that's wrong or two that's wrong, sorry, we just so I just got a little message there from David. The chances of you poisoning yourself is very great, yet they know exactly what proportions, what part of the plant, which plant, and how to mix them. And again, it goes back to, I think, so-called, modern Western civilization. We've tended to lose that. And I think it is what you've said, that if you live close to the land, then that you never lose that connection. And I think, thank God that people now, they're getting into shamanism, they're getting into all kinds of things, and the awareness is growing. But it certainly seems from what you've said, it's never really diminished at all in the Nordic countries.
No, it hasn't. We have still got those phenomena which have always been. And, I think next year I'm putting a big demonstration together because the Vikings in Denmark has now got their own religion. It's called, I forgot what it's called now, but it's called something. So you can get married or whatever you want to do in there, within their way of life. And we have got a massive big castle there. It's a beautiful castle, a beautiful Viking castle. And I'm actually calling in Viking saga together with Sami saga, together with my work as a physical medium and a medium. And we are all going to work together and try to see what we can do as a unity. Yeah. That would be very interesting to see, because we will cross cultures now. As I said, the North people with the Vikings and their understanding and their way of singing, their way of doing, and the same is it with the Sami people. I might even get some people from Greenland to come down too and be with us, because that their mediumship, their things I haven't said is also fantastic. So we are actually bringing cultures together.
I think that's a wonderful thing. From purely sort of the Viking aspect of it, of course, we have a very kind of disjointed image of the Viking here. The raping and pillaging, and all the bad stuff and that. And I don't think that we ever really go into the culture of the Vikings.
He had a fantastic belief in their gods and in spirit, and they make a heck of a good beer.
I'm sure they do.
Oh, they did. Called milk. It was fantastic. I had some the other week because I was at a place with lots of Vikings and things like that. So it's just fantastic. And it's also fantastic to see that he used the metal. But a lot of the times, as I just talked about in North Norway, she will use to heal the metal of iron, which I found is fascinating. And this is something else people don't look into.
I saw a fascinating program many years ago, and one way to purify and cleanse water is they stick iron in it. So that it forms a little barrier, and then you've got an overflow, and it runs away. And as the iron rusts, it helps to cleanse the water. Yeah. And so again, a natural way of doing things rather than building all these purification plants.
Absolutely,
Yeah. So there's a lot that we lose, I think.
Yeah, I think that also, that what I see also, because again, talking to all these nature people, in the old days, he used a lot of iron, like horseshoes, and put them in the walls to protect them against all evil. And I still find remedies as remnants of this one. We have got a farm in France, which is from 1889, I think it's from, and we still find in the wall these horseshoes. Until I started to do a research, I was then in Sweden doing a demonstration and also a workshop, and it was in a big manor house and wonderful. And the man who owned it, his name is Øyvind, and he's a professor in, I think it was Lund University. And I was then given a lecture to the people upon the metal iron, again horseshoes, and how they used it to protect themselves within Scandinavia and also in France, in the middle of nowhere where we have a farm and things like this. When I was finished, Øyvind came to me and says, "Can I just talk to you, Marion?" Now, this guy is a professor. And I said, "Yes, Øyvind, what is it?" He said, "I have to apologize to you, but I stood and listened to your speech, and I found it fascinating." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And he said, when we bought this manor house, there was a big slab stone outside that was sort of tilting. So he got in machinery and men to lift it because he wanted to put stones underneath it. So it's part of the tradition. And when they actually looked underneath this flagstone, they saw 3 horseshoes lying together. And I went, whoa! I said, I hope you didn't move them. He said, no, we left them. So that is what that was for, protection. I said, there you go.
Because we have a tradition here of having horseshoes around the home or in the home, and people say that it has to be like a U shape. Because if you put it the other way, the luck falls out of it. And as you know, with every myth, there is a certain amount of truth. And it's just making me think now whether the iron in the horseshoe was actually protection, as you've said, rather than this is just a bit of luck, and people maybe losing the translation of it and thinking, it's just luck rather than something else. That's fascinating.
It is fascinating because you start understanding metal, but you also start understanding things like copper is another one that's supposed to be quite protected. And I have seen many of times people are using copper, putting it in the ground to stop certain kind of influences around, which is again is again extraordinary. But we have forgotten everywhere that there are these people who deals with this and are fantastic in dealing with it and have a tremendous knowledge that go back hundreds of years. But we have all laughed at it. We don't listen to it anymore. We don't do anything with it. And thank God that I was born in a country where we still talk about these phenomena. We still talk about the mediumship. We had strong mediums. We don't have them today, I have to say. It's becoming one heck of a mishmash everywhere because they haven't got the training. They haven't sat for the training. We used to have in Denmark, probably was the biggest place for spiritualists, and we had something like 30 spiritualist churches. We have one left. So that's really just collapsed. Sad.
It is, and I think that's happening in this country. Although I think, if there are bad mediums about and badly run churches, then just like most businesses, I think they deserve to fall by the wayside because we need talent. And unfortunately, there are organisations that just churn people out. And they because mediumship has become fashionable and being a medium has become fashionable, they jump on this bandwagon and they have all these ideas about the money that we're supposed to make. As you know, most mediums don't make a lot of money.
No.
But there's this image there of I can be famous, I can do this, I can do that. And unfortunately, there's a sector of this industry which feeds into that and churns out people that are really not prepared.
Absolutely.
We're just going to go into sorry, Marion.
That's all right.
We're just going to go into a break in a minute or two, and then we'll be straight back. One of the things I'd like to discuss with you, because you mentioned direct voice a few times, and you were blessed as well. I sat with Leslie once, but you were blessed to sit with Leslie Flint, and we've played sometimes a few of the recordings here because I love to promote his work, and so we'll talk about that when we get back. But in a moment, have you got a web page and a URL?
Yeah, somewhere.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll find it. But we're just going to go into a break, and we'll be back straight after this.
All right.
Have you ever wondered what's behind the open door? Then tune in with hosts Maggie Renee and Vicky Johns every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Only on the Paramania Radio Network.
Now on Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, join host Tim Malley as he brings you the most recognizable names in the paranormal field on Fox Cities Paranormal Radio.
Look in my eyes, what do you see? The cult of personality.
If you would like to be kept up to date on upcoming show information and events here on Paramania Radio, then please take the time to click on the like button above the chat room to like our Facebook page. And click on follow to follow us on Twitter. Thank you for listening to Paramania Radio.
You are listening to Paramania Radio.
Hi, welcome back to Paramania Radio. You're listening to Leo Bonomo on Voice of Spirit, and we've got a wonderful, wonderful guest this evening. And if you've just joined us, do look back, listen to this on the archive. Some phenomenal things we've been talking about. If you want to Skype in, it's Paramania Radio, and if you do want to call, it's from the States 91929 50150, or you can join us in the chat room if you've got any questions that you want to ask Marion. We're not doing readings this evening, but there's certainly plenty to talk about. I know that there are times when, I speak to other show hosts and they do a half-hour show or an hour show, and they think, wow, 2 hours, how do you fill it? But, I'm sure we could do a 5-hour show with Marion and myself, because there is so much to talk about. So, Marion, welcome back. And we've both been blessed, you particularly, in knowing Leslie Flynn and seeing him at the height of his powers. So give us a rundown on some of the experiences that you've had.
Well, Leslie Flynn, as we all know, was a physical medium who sat in out of the cabinet. He was not in the cabinet, he was outside, which was very unusual. Yep. And he was also totally awake. He lived at the time in Paddington, in the beautiful big white house. But when you got there, you sort of went downstairs to sort of what you would call the basement or semi-basement. And in the room down there, he had almost like chairs that you would have in a cinema, just in sort of 3 or 4 rows he had. And he would just sit down in the other end and with his big tape recorder. When you came into the room and you said hi to Leslie and so forth, there was loads of sort of paintings, and there was loads of pictures of various different American stars and English stars as the signature to Leslie, you could see. And Mickey, his guide, there was also a painting of him. And I always remember something that Leslie turned around and said about Mickey. He said, Marion, that picture there of Mickey, as you see, that's the real one. A lot of people had tried to paint him, but they all look like bad onions. That was his wording. And it took me a long time to figure out why they look like bad onions. But that was his wording about Mickey. Anyhow, coming to Mickey to Leslie Flint, it was interesting to actually witness what was taking place, because there you have Leslie Flint sitting, and you often heard Leslie would go, and straight after that one, you would hear Mickey said, "Oh, stop it, Leslie, you keep on snorting." And then you would turn around, then you heard Leslie say, "Oh, shut up." And then you heard Mickey say, what do you mean, shut up? And those two will listen to have a conversation about snorting because he kept clearing his throat. And it was quite comical to hear those two together. And when I have been there has been not just Mickey's voice, there would also have been other voices there of other spirit. And there was one time I got there and Leslie said to me, which language is it you speak, Marion? And I said, I speak Danish, Norwegian, understand Swedish and other things. Why? I said, well, I've got this tape and you have to listen to it and tell me where it comes from. And I said, well, what happened? And apparently a month or whatever before, they have had some spirit had come in and they had yacked to each other, but he didn't understand any of the language. And the people that were sitting with Leslie at the time didn't understand it neither. So I knew of a girl who are Polish. So I thought I would try to see if Ruth could understand it. And it did actually work out too that it was Polish voices. And there was about 3 and 4 people talking to each other. But Ruth turned around and said to me, oh my God, where have you got this tape from? And I said, Leslie Flint, independent voice medium. I said, why? She said, these people there's on this tape, she said, actually came from Auschwitz, which is a concentration camp. And they were just about to go into the chamber where they would be gassed. And the language wasn't very nice. So I said, wow. So that came through with Leslie. And also there was a time when I sat, my husband Simon was here too. And suddenly you heard a whispering voice. And I thought, I recognized that voice. And it was actually my father in Danish.
Oh.
Again, that was another language. And then he turned over and he said, I will try to speak English, but it's hard. And he just said a few words and then he disappeared. My arguments about mediumship in everywhere. Do people think that everybody on the other side speak English? Yeah. Because, I'm just going like this. I said, it's ridiculous. So when a medium is on the platform like myself, if I have languages, they can use that in the native tongue and they can get through to me in their language. I couldn't speak completely sentence, but I can certainly get words out, which I've done in German, I've done it in Italian, I've done it in Spanish, in order to just give words and explanations, you see, of whatever language it is they are speaking. So it was interesting with Leslie Flint having languages coming over that not even Leslie Flint could understand. And yet he came out.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just great evidence, isn't it, for that to happen? And as you say, I mean, people do tend to assume that it is just the language that people within the room would know. But of course, people... it's all telepathic, as we know, in spirit, so you don't need a language as such. But of course, as you communicate with Earth, then you go back into that condition that you're familiar with, and there's no reason that you wouldn't speak various languages.
And I just think that just reading, it strengthens mediumship, I think, when you can hear those languages, when it is not actually spoken or nobody can really understand what is happening. And I just think that is another part I do like upon communication. But funny enough, what Leslie said, sorry about that, he also turned around and he was very skeptical, extremely skeptical of all the mediums of today. That was when he was alive. And he actually turned around and he said to me one day, well, you know what, Marion? I said, what, Leslie? And he said, he said, today's medium, they're like, I don't know what, like factories, like the belts, he says, they come off the blooming conveyor belt, he said, one after the other. And even then, he didn't like the mediumship at that time at all, because I think that it was started to become, we say, commercial. What the interesting part about it is, I have sat in a physical circle where both Leslie Flint and Gordon Higginson have walked in together and actually came up and spoke directly to me.
Oh, so obviously for the benefit of listeners, after they'd passed. Yeah.
And we had some great conversation. But like Marion always does, I test all the time. So he was saying something and I was talking to Leslie and I sort of say, oh yes, Leslie, we were at the psychic dinner and dance. And he said, So we were, Marion. And I said, do you remember? He said, yes, I did. You wore a blue dress. And indeed I did. And then he turned around. That was the day where I stood up and he said something about, and I remember that complete, that he was giving a speech. And we had this beautiful, beautiful psychic dinner and dance. We had this food that was laid in front of us. And it stated on the card that we was going to have, I think there was lamb, we had roast potatoes and all sorts. And they went, and peas. But there was no peas. So I remember Leslie standing up at the psychic dinner and dance and said, I know I'm a heck of a good medium and a physical one, but I have nothing to do with the vanishing peas. He had a great sense of humor, a tremendous sense of humor. But that was Leslie all over. And I am very glad that I saw Leslie many of times and saw his work, because that, again, I have to say, that has given me a bite to become better and do research and following research and so forth. So I also have to say I'm a very healthy skeptic. I don't believe in everything I see. Healthy skeptic, am I?
You have to check, because, you know, I mean, some people are lucky, they have a reading and they get for them absolute proof. That's very, very rare. It's built up over time, sometimes decades, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I think you have to be critical. You know, sometimes when people question a medium, then the medium tends to get a little bit upset sometimes, you know, so, well, don't you believe? And it's not the fact of that, it's the fact of I'm just asking for a confirmation in some way. And it's a good thing, you know, because I learn something every day, thank God. But I think, and I think if we can push ourselves or allow ourselves to be pushed gently by people, it's fine tuning all the time, isn't it? It's honing the blade.
Absolutely. I just think that we don't know enough, really, and I don't think that the churches specific, I can't talk anywhere else around the world but in Great Britain, but we don't have the manpower in the churches to teach the philosophy anymore and what lies behind it. I have to say, today, all the people who comes in the spiritualist churches in Great Britain, they tells the fortune. They have no communication link. They can't hold the communication link on no circumstances. They will suddenly get something through that could be quite accurate, but they have no idea where it comes from. That's how dangerous it has become.
Yeah, I agree with you. 100%.
But I don't understand neither, I have to turn around and say, Leo, why other people don't have my sort of mediumship where we do actually have physical phenomena on the platform. I have had that numerous of times, and I mean numerous of times. It has been absolutely extraordinary being into a spiritualist church, and then things happens. The funny part about it is that every time it happens, half of the congregation or the whole congregation gets so frightened that they literally pilch out through the back door. Because they don't understand that when you come into what we call a spiritualist church in Great Britain, it isn't fortune telling, it's evidence, and they ain't told that. So that's where your problem starts.
I think so, and I think the standard is so lacking. I'm quite well known for being outspoken, really, not only with Sue's wetting herself laughing here, not only for outing blatant frauds, but the way some mediums are trained nowadays. You know, they get up and they fumble around for something. I've got the name John, or, you know, has anyone lost a dog? Or, you know, and asking questions. And I think that's despicable, really. You know, because if you've got somebody, if you've got a communicator in spirit with you, they know who they're with. And any questions that the medium might have, it's simple enough. You direct them to the communicator. You know, I don't understand this. Explain a bit more. But so many nowadays, I don't think they have the understanding, and so they ask questions, and it just allows skeptics to say, well, they're fishing for information.
Absolutely, cold
They're just
readings.
Yeah, they're just not trained in that way. And I think once you've got the confidence, the way I train my students is once you've got the confidence that if you don't know something, ask the communicator, and they'll give that information to the person, because that's
Absolutely.
what's needed.
Absolutely.
I'm quite
what-
Sorry, go on.
Sorry.
Um,
No, what
I'm-
I really get annoyed with, and you must do the same, is standing in a spiritualist church and listening to a medium, giving a message, and then the person down in the congregation turns around and says, "I don't understand that," and the medium goes around and say, "That's all right, darling. You can hold it." What do they mean you can hold anything? Don't be daft. If you got them on the telephone, you go back and ask them. Go back and ask Spirit and get some more information. All this nonsense about holding it, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
So,
it's a get out for bad mediumship, but it just doesn't look good.
It
Again,
hasn't done for ages.
yeah, and I think the fault lies fairly and squarely with some of the larger institutions, because they're interested on bums on seats. It is a business. It is to make money. Many years ago, when the Arthur Findlay College started up, what they would do is look for very talented people, and the idea of the college was give up work, whatever you're doing, come here, train, we'll look after you, we'll pay for you, there's nothing you need, and we'll get the best medium out of you that we can. Then they used to pay. But nowadays, Sue was just saying they take a lot of money off you. Now they're just interested in the money. But then they fully supported a medium. So a medium didn't need to work. They could just dedicate their lives to it. And I think that's made an awful difference in mediumship now. It's been seen as a money-making machine. And
I think it's like that all over the world, including in Denmark. Yeah. You sit on your Skype, you sit on the Facebook or whatever you have got, and you can actually get somebody sitting there and saying, if you pay me 10, it could be dollars or it could be pounds, I will answer one question for you. Yeah. And if you 2 questions, is 25 and so forth. It's actually money game on trying to give a reading on the actually internet system, which I think it's also very, very sad. Though I think that the internet is fine. I have to say that it's a good media for many people. We're sitting here doing a radio program. It's fine. And there are things coming out. But these mediums are dangerous. I've just been in Denmark and I had to deal with, and this is again, I cross over everything, a young man who I have to say, in a sense of it, was overshadowed. You can call it possessed, you can call it whatever it was, but his behavior was extraordinarily dangerous. And I actually he is a gay man, and it's fine. He is married to a Lutheran priest. And I had to call in not only his husband, because they are married. I had to call in another priest I know, a Lutheran priest called Tom. And then I had to call in a Roman Catholic priest because he knew about exorcism, and another priest. So they have now been working together to try to help this young man. Luckily enough, he is being helped. So what I'm saying, cross over borders, work together, for God's sake. Just work together.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of people that dabble, unfortunately, and they don't understand. I talk to some mediums and they say, well, I've used a Ouija board and it's fine. Well, yes, if you've been trained and you know how to protect yourself, that's one thing. But it's sold as a game now, primarily in the States, but, it's sold here as a game. And people treat it as a bit of fun. And they don't have the understanding that the spirit world in that sense can really come back and bite you. It's a dangerous thing.
The trouble is, Leo, it isn't just the ignorant people who has this. You're thinking about what I just told you. This is within the church. So there was no protection. It's almost like turning around and saying to people, well, hang on a minute. Bad vibration, bad spirit, whatever it is you want to call it, there is absolutely no way that the church actually could be protected, because it, it can go anywhere, it can go anywhere, and this was within the church.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's but as I said, I look at mediumship today, and I'm so glad I'm not in it in that way, and have learned it in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I have traveled and I have seen mediums. I also have to say that a lot of the physical mediums that operate today, Colin Fry, for instance, who's now passed over, was an excellent physical medium when he started. I knew the guy who trained him, John Austin. I saw what John Austin did. I saw Colin at the early stage of his physical mediumship, and he was good. But money came in the way, I'm afraid. So we have him. Yeah. I saw David Thompson. I know David Thompson, and I saw the person and the people who trained him. And they was excellent people that trained him. But then it started going highly wrong somewhere else. I sat with our German friend Kai Mucki in Germany when he was training. So I also saw, and through actually sitting, and this is very interesting with Kai, at that time, Kai at the time had one of the, I will always say, it's the biggest evidence upon life after death, though he called himself a New Age medium, and that's fine. But at the time when I sat with him, we had suddenly a ball coming into the room and landing in front of me. It was a wax ball. And we looked at this wax ball. Then we took it afterwards when the seance was finished, and we went upstairs, and a woman with rather large nails was peeling off the wax. And as we were peeling off the wax, in the middle, there was a rolled up paper. So we unfolded the paper. And he said, I don't know what language this is, but I don't even understand what it's saying. And I said, let's have a look at it. And I looked at it, and it stated, in Danish, it was, welcome to this Monday evening, Marion. This is your friend, physical medium from Denmark, Ejner Nielsen, who sends my regard. It was handwritten. Am Marion stupid? No. I sent a photo of this one to a friend of mine in Denmark who's a journalist, a very old journalist, and saying, could you please tell me, this signature and this piece of paper, is this an old handwriting or what is it? Because some of the words that were used, I didn't even understand. So Paul Black took it, looked at it, and he wrote back to me again, and he said, this is written of the old generation. The words that are used in this communication no longer exist in Denmark, and it would have died out in roughly about 1960 or 62. And think about it, that Ejner Nielsen passed in 65.
Wow. Yeah. I was reading about some recordings that were given, and it was because of the country it originated from, they called it speaking in tongues, and this was, I think, in it was actually connected to Egypt, and around biblical times, and they couldn't understand what it was. So eventually they realised that they would need an archaeologist, and many archaeologists couldn't understand it, and they got an archaeologist expert in ancient languages, and he could understand some of what was being said on the recording, but he said that language, or the language that he was hearing, had died out some 2,500 years.
Fascinating,
Wonderful
isn't it?
proof. Yeah, he said that that language had never been heard in living memory. Yeah.
I just think it is absolutely. And here I'm sitting with this piece of paper rolled up in this ball, if you like. I'm sitting here in Danish. By the way, was the only Dane there, in a language nobody else understood. I could not understand it neither, because It was written in Old Danish, and words I didn't understand had now, doesn't exist anymore. I just
Yeah.
find it absolutely extraordinary. These are the kind of evidence in which I like. This is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for all this table tipping and whatever you have got it and playing around with it or whatever. I am not interested in it. I have traveled quite a lot to find more evidence upon mediumship. And when I turned around and said from the beginning that our mediums was very much in research centers all over the place, last year I went with my husband and a friend of mine to Duke University in North Carolina, into the Rhine Research Center there, and went and looked for evidence upon the Danish and other mediums from Scandinavia and their work, because he was all tested, and it was interesting to read. But it was interesting to also read some of the paperwork, because we was reading every other things when we were there. The money involved at the time and the research and so forth. You find bankers were given money, banks was given money, the Air Force was involved, the church was involved, the Navy was involved, rich people was involved. They all got money in those days to the research. And it was really interesting to read some of the letters, how big of an interest there were then to the damn interest there is today. I mean, people are scraping in money all over the place because that nobody actually go in and, if you like, put money into research and try to understand this work a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think some of the stars of today, they're more open and wanting to express it. But again, I think it's something to enhance, because it's fashionable, enhance their image as well. And I wouldn't want to take it away from many of them, but there's certainly some that do that. But it's genuine research is what's needed. We're going to just go into a break now, and we'll be straight back after this.
you want to hear different viewpoints on the spirit world? Then join Alan Cox as he talks with his guests about their beliefs, experiences, and delve into a diverse view of life and the afterlife. Join Alan Cox for Understanding Spirit every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, here on the Paramania Radio Network. You know, Brock, I'm a little bummed since Tech Time ended.
Yeah, me too. But you know what we could do to fix this?
What?
A new show.
A new show? About what?
About all things paranormal. Not just technology, but everything.
Brilliant. What would we call it?
Paratime with Brock and Doc.
Cool. And it could air on Sundays at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific?
Only on the Paramania Radio Network.
Awesome. Welcome to the all-new Paramania Radio.
Don't go by the book. Think like a pirate.
Hi, welcome back to Voice of Spirit, Leo Bonomo on Paramania Radio. We've got the wonderful Marion Damper-Jeans here. She's been talking about some fascinating stuff. Once again, if you've joined us late, do look on archive and see some of the topics that we've covered. Marion has got a website, but I'm sure if you Google Marion, Marion, Damper, Damper -jeans, JEANS. You'll find her. We were just talking. Marion is actually fully booked for the foreseeable future, which is great. It's a great statement of her work and that. But okay, so welcome back, Marion.
Thank you very much indeed. I also have to say that when I actually do my work, and it's something that other people don't do in their private readings, I only see 2 people a day. I refuse to see anymore. Yeah. And when a person comes to me for a sitting, I do not have no watches in my house. I do not stick to a time limit. So a person can be with me up to 2 hours for the same £30 that I charge. I don't charge anymore. Nothing for the old age pensioners that comes here. But my sittings is based on spirit, and it's based on what they have to say, so there's no clock here.
I think that's wonderful. I really do. I used to work like that myself a bit, but then I got kind of pushed, and having to pay bills, it's altered slightly. But one thing I do insist on is getting no information from the sitter.
Absolutely.
Because spirit will provide it, and I feel that that's the best way.
What is also interesting in having some of my clients here, they also manage to have physical phenomena in my home. I mean, it doesn't stop. I mean, here it happens too. I mean, there was a lady from Jamaica who came here. I didn't know why she was here. And I just said to her, like I do to all my clients, would you like to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? And she said, yes, she would love the cup of tea. And on my floor, funnily enough, I had a little, it was just a little bowl. I have a cat and he likes to play with the bowl. And that was just lying there. And suddenly I heard her whisper in here and she ran off. And I thought, what in the heck was that? She kept flying into my kitchen. And I said to her, are you all right? And then she looked at me and she said, you know that bowl lying on the floor? I said, yeah. She said, is that electric? I said, what do you mean, is it electric? She said, it rolls from where your cabinet was into the middle of the floor. Then it turned around and then it came towards me. And I just took one look at her and I said, young girl, I said to her, you have a child on the other side of life who just wants to play with you. And she nearly fainted. Yes, she had a 3-year-old little girl who passed.
Oh, bless. Isn't that wonderful?
So you do actually have that. And when I was sitting in Norway doing a reading for somebody in Norway, there was an accident in one of the boats going into the, they have got the oil rigs and things like that. And I was talking about, I said, it's funny because I said, I can't stand sailing. My husband loves sailing. I said, I'm sitting again blooming seasick. I kept on saying, and I could really feel this kind of seasick. And I said, there's this gentleman and he drowned. That's why I'm so seasick. But he went down with a boat. And I was explaining and giving the name of the boat. And she said, my God, that was her husband. I think that he's been passed over for about 3 weeks. When we stood up, actually on the floor next to me was a puddle of water. So they do actually come and do very strange things if you have got like that kind of mediumship. And it's quite fascinating when it happens. That also happens within some of my, it doesn't happen all the time in the sitting. It doesn't happen all the time when I'm on the platform. But suddenly, as I say, that a spirit takes flight. That's what I call it. And they will do all sorts of things. We have had in Denmark, in some of the halls, we have had absolutely knockings or rappings on the walls. You would hear them going around rapping and moving the furniture on the stage when I was there, which is quite fascinating to actually see it happening. And you're standing there looking at it and your chair just disappears sideways. And another time in Denmark, it was quite funny. We asked everybody to switch off the damn telephone. I said, switch your phone off. So, I started to work and I was suddenly going to this gentleman up in the balcony and I was saying to him, I have your wife here, and suddenly somebody's blooming telephone starting to ring. And we were all sitting and everybody was looking in the pocket. But indeed, they have all turned the telephone off. And it rang again. And I said, I give up. I said, some idiot has left the telephone on. What actually happened was that a man sitting in the balcony, she said, let me tell you, Marion, my wife died 8 months ago. She worked at a Danish switchboard for a telephone company for the last 27 years.
Oh.
One way of connection. Do you see? Yeah. And people often do that. They will do something to reaffirm that the connection you have got is there, and I like that.
Absolutely, and they do it in the strangest ways, and I love that when that happens in readings. One thing that's kind of struck me, people nowadays, I think partly through encouragement, but they say, well, you need to decide what to do. If you're going to be a physical medium, that's what you do. If you're going to be a mental medium, that's what you do. I used to get lots of physical phenomena many years ago, but and it's all stopped now, although I do get some rappings and things in the house sometimes when people are here. But it's positively discouraged, isn't it? If you've got a knack or the ability for physical, it's like, well, you stop everything else. And the same with mental mediumship. You don't. There doesn't seem to crossover. But do you think, like I do, that actually the whole thing's together? It works wonderfully.
The whole thing is together. I just know that when you sit in a mental, and I think that this is also where the teaching goes wrong, because the people don't understand really. Mental mediumship is one thing. Physical is another thing. Clairvoyant, clairaudient, clear sentence, clear wherever you've got it. It's all on one line. Materialization, what you have got is apport. You've got ectoplasm. That's over on that side. Yeah. If you sit in both circles, you could do it. But by the time you get into the physical circle, you're knackered because it takes so much strength out of you. It's unbelievable. And you never have any time when you sit in a physical circle time is there for you. You can't just sit for an hour. You can sit there for a couple of hours if you like, this kind of thing. So that is also very interesting. But the trouble is with physical circles, it can take up to 10 years before you ever get any phenomena. And people today will not sit for physical or even develop mental mediumship because it takes too long. That is the difference.
Yeah, it's a want it now society, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I know Leslie was talking about when he first sat, because the family was quite poor, weren't they? And the only reason he went to this circle and sat in this circle in this posh lady's house, as he used to say, was because he got tea and cake. And that was his inspiration to go, you know. And then he said he was very, very embarrassed one week because he fell asleep and he didn't know what to do. But that was 10 years later. And they said, oh, it was wonderful, you know, and this happened and that happened. But his initial reaction was, I've fallen asleep, I've embarrassed myself. He went, you know, not really wishing to develop at all. It was just nice to go to a nice house and have some cake. So it's quite funny.
I used to, every time we used to sit we sat in Dulwich for a long time in London. And when we sat there, and I sat in the cabinet up there, I always used to love coming down because we had pizza afterwards. That was quite nice. But let me tell you about our little circle we had. We had the woman who owned the house in Dulwich. She also has a cat called Radar. And that cat Radar was the seventh sitter in the circle. He had his own box. He has his own place to sit. He had a band around his neck so we could see him if it got dark or in the light. And he will sit there and he will have his own bowl of water. And he will literally be part of the circle. He will not move. He sat there. Sometimes when we had a little boy called Benjamin that came in, you could hear him purr. But what was really funny about him, every time that we were sitting and singing, and specifically the old song called I'm Forever Blowing Bubble, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, he sat there. He went, meow, meow, meow. That was the only song he liked out of the lot. Bless it. So that also means that you can sit in a circle and you can still have your animals with you. And if the animals behave, there's no problem.
Absolutely. I have sat in some circles where there has been, funnily enough, mostly cats, although there was a dog once that was very well behaved, but tends to be cats. And again, as you say, you know, if cats are fine, then that's great. I had the experience when I was young, and I would have been, I think, 9 or 10, and there was a gentleman that used to come, and it was overshadowing, but then he was starting to get stronger than that. And it was done in a perfectly safe way, all controlled by my guides. But I began to suspect myself that something wasn't quite right. So I was thinking about what I should do, and I thought, well, next time this guy takes over, I'll find our cat. And so that happened, and I realised the cat was in the hall. This was upstairs. So I opened my bedroom door, and the cat took one look at me, and we used to have, you know, that wood chip wallpaper. And the cat literally ran straight up the wall, across the ceiling, trying to get away. And I realised, you know, thinking, that doesn't look so good. So I shut the door and dealt with it. So it was all in a controlled way, but it was a wonderful way for spirit to give experience. And again, I think people don't get that kind of grounding, certainly in the institutions, but it has to be done in the right way within circle, doesn't it?
But do you also know, and I don't know if anybody knows this, but in the old days, they actually used to deliver animals into the seance room.
I never knew that. Wow.
No. Well, Einar Nielsen in Denmark sat in his first floor seance room together with all his people, and they were sitting there, and suddenly again they heard cling, clong, clong, like this in the middle of the floor. And then they heard birds. And they thought, has anybody forgot to shut the window? And somebody said, well, it's evening, so we don't have birds. He said, well, what's in the middle of the room then? And this bird was twinkling away. So he went over and he said to Einar Nielsen, I'm sorry, but you have to wake up again, Einar. You have to come back because there's something happening. And when they actually turned the whole light on, there was a bird cage with 2 doves in it, 2 white doves in it. And there was no 2 white dove and a cage before. So they actually transport animals in the same time. This is not first time. Only about a year ago, I was talking to my girlfriend. She phoned me up in panic because her mother had died. But down in the back garden in Chichester, where she lived, she had this bird cage down there. She had cockatoos, and she had 2 cockatoos down there. Yeah. And she died. And when the daughter went down to the cockatoos to give them some dinner down there, there was 4 cockatoos in there. So not only did she have to get sort of rid of 4 cockatoos, she didn't know where the 2 other one comes from. And there was no way that these cockatoos that was down there could actually get in because it's all wired, it's got central heating, it's got everything. You can't get them in. So it's very interesting to know that you can transport animals in the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful. There's something there that's caught my interest, and you had mentioned it earlier on in the show, is that they woke the gentleman up. Again, nowadays it's you mustn't touch the medium. They're usually in a cabinet. It's usually dark, sometimes more light than others. But there's this whole myth again of not touching the mediums. There seems to be, I don't know whether it's a fear or what it is, but it seems to be connected with the seance in the dark, and we've got this rule, and we've got that rule. And I think like the churches, they start to make up rules for physical mediumship and say, well, that's how it is. And obviously it's not. It wasn't when you were experiencing it, and it's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, but I also do know one thing, that in 1990, Einar Nielsen, when he first came to our physical circle, he did actually turn around and say something very, very interesting. He said, in the future of mediumship, in specific physical mediumship, he said, we will not touch ectoplasm. We will build our own light. And we will be able to produce ourselves within that light. If anything happens, it will just disintegrate into the ground. And in the circle in Denmark, they have actually had first a blue light that was there all evening. They could sit and talk to each other. And then the next week they had a red light. They could still sit and talk to each other because it was in the red light. And they went through about 4 different lights. And I do know that Kite Mugge also have lights. Suddenly spirit lights will come up. There's no beam to it. It will just sit there and it just lights the whole room up. So spirit, in a sense of it, since 1990, when I was told that in my seance in Dulwich in London, that there is new lights being produced that will just disintegrate into the floor, so the medium won't be burned. So they will actually not have the infrared light in which we've been sitting in. What they will have is literally a light that he has been working on for many years that can withstand all sorts of things. And I thought that is absolutely what we need. We need some modern technology coming in.
Yeah, I was when I started to sit for physical, and it wasn't very long, but I was instructed by my guides to get a blue light, which it was a particular shade, but it's almost kind of moonlight. And so we did that for a while. I've got a friend, Samantha Scott, and she's a physical medium as well. And we used to sit in half light or full light, all filmed. Sometimes we could see things happening within the room, but quite often there were things which just come out on the film as well. And one time we had an extraterrestrial, an alien there. Have you ever had that within circles? Because that's kind of taboo as well, isn't it now?
Yeah. No, I have never had that at all. I know that the Skull Experimental had that, and I know him very well. I've known Robin Foy for years, and Robin Foy for years and years and years. And I thought that was absolutely fantastic. But I think that my sort of mediumship has always gone into the evidence on the relatives and things like that. This has been my sort of prime sort of things, I have been into. I do believe that the possibility are there. I believe that there's many new things that's coming in that I certainly don't understand. And I'm very happy to learn more about it and try to research it, because I think it's all very interesting. And I also love the way that Robin Foy, with his circle, they filmed it, they were there, investigated it and things like that. And I think that that's where we have to go to today, not to prove to people it exists, but it will be good to actually film it, though you will always have critics, you will always have skeptics turning around saying it's a setup. So it doesn't matter what we're doing. But before we finish all this, I must tell you, Leo, and that is, there are physical circles sitting in the daylight, and they have phenomena.
Yeah. You know what I would like to see? A few programs back, as I was doing the program, and my guide came forward, and what I did was really threw out a challenge, because what my guide was saying to me is, look, we have radio programs, we've got YouTube and that. What would be fantastic is for a group to get together, physical seance, in light, recording live with a running clock, in hundredths of seconds or whatever. So it's a lot harder for skeptics to say, well, that's been photoshopped in and everything else. And maybe do that on a once a month or once a week basis to build up people's interest in genuine physical mediumship. Because again, I think that will help to cut out some of the fraud that's gone on. And as you know yourself, Gary Marion, and we talked about him on the show at the time, was caught cheating. And I think if we can do things like that, it will spread true, proper, provable mediumship.
Yeah, what I liked about that was it didn't come from, skeptica. It actually came from within the movement, that they actually turned around and said, we pleased ourselves by going around saying, look, this is fraud and so forth, which is very interesting. But the whole subject is fascinating.
It is. I think we did ourselves no end of good there, because I think if a skeptic had got hold of it, it would have been very damaging. Yeah. We've got a couple of minutes left. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. We'll have to have you on again, because, as I said before, we could do a 2, 4, 5 hour show, without any problem. So you'll have to come back again. It's been really, really entertaining, enlightening. I don't mean entertain. My guys just said entertainment. What do you mean? I don't mean it in that way, but very enlightening. And it's been a real sincere pleasure to speak to you, Marion.
Thank you. That has been very nice. I would just like to say to all the Scandinavian, if you're listening, good night for my adieu in Norway. And bye-bye to all of you. It's been a great pleasure.
That's been absolutely fantastic. And, maybe some of those in Scandinavia will, because people listening from all over the world, and hopefully they're tune in or download it on archive or just listen on archive. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
Thank you.